Independently of what is happening, and unfortunately we're having wars, we're having very serious things happening, but in spite of that, climate change is progressing and climate change is a bigger and bigger threat.
We're joined by Ambassador André Corrêa de Lago, the Brazilian president of the COP30, the climate summit taking place in Belém, a city in the Amazon, later this year. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me this beautiful day here in Bonn.
Yes. So now we are currently in Bonn, where negotiations are taking place in preparation of the COP conference in November. We are now 10 years on from the Paris Agreement having been decided and are facing a period of more conflict and also higher tensions geopolitically. How difficult does that make negotiations?
Yes, it is a complex context, but you know, all presidents of COP say that their COP is happening at a very special and difficult moment, etc., etc. So I think that we have to understand that one of the greatest challenges of climate change is how do you keep the relevance of the theme in a world where so many other things are happening and things that affect people's life more directly, that affect politicians more directly, and that affect the economy more directly. What we should really try to achieve is to place climate change where it really deserves, which is a permanent overarching theme. So independently of what is happening, and unfortunately we're having wars, we're having very serious things happening, but in spite of that, climate change is progressing and climate change is a bigger and bigger threat. So how can we convince people that are naturally more interested or more concerned with direct threats that this threat is not so distant and we can do something about it?
And how can we convince them of that, considering that leaders' attentions are being drawn elsewhere?
Yeah, I think that unfortunately one of the things that changed is that in recent years there were much more incidents that were provoked by climate change. And so I believe that we have changed one of the main concerns there was about climate change, which was a discussion about the science of climate change. Is it happening? Is it really being provoked by people, by human activities? I think that we have progressed very much in that sense, so that I think that scientific denialism has reduced significantly because people are living climate change much more intensively this recent years. So I think we're living a new phase, and this new phase is maybe also a new challenge, which is that to convince people that we can slow it, or that we can interrupt it, or that we can build an infrastructure, for instance, that will allow people to have a better life in spite of climate change. But I think the biggest challenge is to incorporate climate change into economics and into finance, and make sure that fighting climate change becomes something positive for the economy. Not that it's positive in absolute terms, but since we had lots of technological progress, since we had lots of experiences in many countries that were successful, how can we incorporate climate into the economy and make sure that it doesn't disrupt growth? On the opposite, maybe it can stimulate growth, and it can even stimulate more jobs, and many cases prove that.
Moving to Brazil, your home country, it's home to the largest part of the Amazon rainforest, which scientists have said is going to be essential when it comes to trying to limit temperatures to 1.5. What role is the Amazon going to play when it comes to the climate negotiations in Brazil?
Brazil has a very particular sources of emissions. Now, most countries have their emissions coming from energy, from transportation, or from other economic activities. Brazil has this very particular circumstance that most of our emissions come from deforestation, and most of it illegal deforestation. So it is a very strange profile because Brazil is one of the 10 largest economies in the world, and its main source of emissions is not an economic activity. So this, for one side, makes Brazil very conscious of how serious deforestation is. When President Lula became president again 2.5 years ago, it had become 50% of our emissions. So since these 2.5 years, deforestation has reduced significantly in Brazil, more than 50%. And Brazil has this commitment to end deforestation by 2030. So while we reduce our emissions from deforestation, then the other emissions now, our emissions will look more like the emissions of other countries related to economic activity. But coming back to deforestation, what is the circumstance? Is that for Brazilians, deforestation is something essential to combat climate change. But in international terms, deforestation all over the world is responsible for around 10% of the world's emissions. So in Brazil, it reached 50% at some moment, but in the world it's only 10%. So Brazil is so conscious of the importance of combating climate change that President Lula decided to have the COP happening in the Amazon to first to invite the world to see the complexity of the Amazon, but at the same time to show that Brazil is conscious of its main source of emissions. It's a great challenge in many points of view, but that's why the Amazon has a very special symbolism beyond the fact that the Amazon is probably one of the great solutions to combat climate change.
But one of the issues in Brazil at the moment is that the country is currently selling oil exploration rights. And 2 years after countries agreed to transition away from fossil fuels at COP28 in Dubai, as COP president for Brazil, what challenges do you see in trying to convince parties to honor that agreement when your own country is looking to expand its fossil fuel production?
Transitioning away from fossil fuels is one of the very important decisions of recent years, and it was in Dubai. And this transition has to happen according to each country's circumstance. As you know, there are some countries that 90% of their economy is related to fossil fuels. So it's a major impact. They have to completely rethink their economy. In the case of Brazil, we have again a very particular circumstance, is that we are at the same time the champions of renewables, and now we are a very important producer of oil. Champion of renewables, why? Because we didn't have coal. We have very little coal in Brazil. So very early Brazil moved to develop its energy through hydroelectric dams. So today with wind, with solar, with hydro, and with bioelectricity, you have in Brazil more than 90% of the electricity is renewable in Brazil. So how strange. I mean, we're talking about a country that is an important oil producer and an important oil exporter, and at the same time, a champion of renewables. But the question is that, so each country has to find its own way towards its targets of being carbon neutral by 2050. And so Brazil has designed its transition, taking into consideration all those realities. Each country has a different path. Brazil is quite convinced that we can use some of the wealth that the oil brings to us to accelerate the transition. There is a huge debate in the country. Since we are a democratic country with very different opinions, it is a huge debate really in the country. But this is something that is very necessary because there is a source of wealth that may get financing, while other sources of wealth may not get financing. So developing countries have this circumstance that they don't only do what they want to do, they do what they find money to do. Yeah. So this debate is very important in Brazil, and there are some sectors that believe that what we are investing in oil, we could invest in other sectors. There are some economists that say, no, look, you're going to make so much money by exporting this oil that it's worth doing it, because thanks to that you can accelerate, for instance, the restoration of the Amazon. So we don't have the perfect answer, but we have a very fair debate in the country about what do we do with this soil that we may have, because as you know, we still don't have the confirmation that there is oil in that region in the north of Brazil. We have oil in other areas of Brazil, and now Brazil is on its way to become the 5th largest exporter. So.
But for you as president of the climate conference, as I said, trying to promote a transition away from fossil fuels, it must undermine the negotiations that are going to be taking place in November.
Transitioning away from fossil fuels can have many paths. I am a bit in the hand of experts that have different opinions, but I believe that one of the key, let's say, points of this debate is that countries have to decide independently what is their way to do that transition. So I cannot tell you that we have the perfect path or a path that is an example for others. But the truth is that what we have is that we have opened the debate in a democratic country with free press, with free academia, etc., etc. So the debate is on.
Scientists are saying that we are going to overshoot the 1.5 degree limit set by leaders as part of the Paris Agreement. Is this year's conference where we really bury the 1.5, or how do you, as president, see a way of saving that?
Well, I'm not a scientist, I'm an economist, but I have to tell you that obviously we rely on many very good scientists. The IPCC reports are obviously the essential base for us to have our decisions. I also have a small council of scientists that is advising me also. And I asked this question to them 2 days ago. And what they say is that there is still a possibility, and we should still work with the possibility of keeping 1.5. Although we have surpassed it, we can go back to 1.5 if we accelerate many of the things that we have to do. And this is the great challenge, is that when you are taking these decisions with so many countries, you know that you need everybody on board doing the right thing. And as you know, this is very, very difficult. So let's see that we have to keep the 1.5 as much as possible, but we are going to see what is the behavior of the countries.
I mean, you just said that everybody had to be on board doing the right thing. The world's second biggest emitter is no longer on board. What impact do you think that is going to have, this year being the first year that they won't be at the climate conference? The United States is obviously the country I'm talking about. Yeah.
Politically, it has a very strong impact because, as you know, the Paris Agreement was an agreement designed to bring the US back to the negotiations because the US had not joined the Kyoto Protocol. So essentially, the Paris Accord is designed for the US to be there. So the US quitting is something that really complicates many things from a political point of view. From an effective point of view, What we understand is that many states of the United States, and there are some evaluations that believe that more than 35 states in the United States will continue to follow the Paris Accord and will continue to have their state laws taking into consideration the Paris Accord. And this would correspond to almost 70% of the US economy. So when we think that the US have left the Paris Accord, it's the US central government, but we have to some relativization in that, because you're going to have this involvement and this continuation of business and some national governments that are going to continue to follow the Paris Accord.
You mentioned earlier on as well that there are lots of impacts that we are already feeling as part of climate change. A lot of those in Brazil itself, drought, the wildfires that we have seen, flooding. Should countries be getting tougher on the companies that are producing the majority of emissions and those high emitting industries?
Well, first of all, it's true. We had last year dreadful demonstrations of climate change in Brazil, and it had a very strong popular impact, because people were very conscious how these things, how these extreme weather events were happening, and more frequently, as you said, we had awful droughts, we had horrible fires, but there is we have not still been convincing enough, I believe, for people to understand the correlation between what needs to be done and the effect of what needs to be done. And this is, I believe, one of the challenges we're going to have, is that there is a great almost denialism that the changes in the economy that we should do can be good. So that's why when you want to focus on a company, or you want to focus on a sector, or you want to focus on a country, it is still something really very delicate. And in every country, be it Germany, be it Brazil, be it the country in Africa, the sectors that believe they are going to suffer more by fighting climate change are the most active. Be whatever the country, they are going to defend their interests, because it's a survival issue for many companies, it's a survival issue for many sectors. Personally, I think that we have very little time, and the IPCC tell us we are in a decade that is the decade that will define if we will be able to fight climate change. But the truth is that inside every country there are forces that are very resistant to the necessary economic changes. But since I'm an optimist, I think that there are already huge demonstrations that, as I told you, that these efforts can bring economic growth, can bring more jobs, etc. But this is not yet very well incorporated into full policies of governments, because even in governments, for instance, the ministries of environment say something that normally is not exactly what the Ministry of Energy says, it's not what the Ministry of Transportation says, or the Ministry of Industry. So there are divisions in every country. So there is not one country is doing everything right. No, it's not happening. You have countries in which more ministries embark into this. We have in Brazil one very important evolution in this government is the commitment of the Ministry of the Economy. The Ministry of the Economy is absolutely convinced that this agenda, the fight against climate change, is an amazing opportunity for Brazilian growth. So they are structuring the economic thinking of the years ahead, incorporating climate change, the fight against climate change.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.